Welcome to the Ripple Effect with Ray. We've got Tom here, founder of Upside app. Thank you so much for joining us here today.
My pleasure, Rachel. I'm excited.
Absolutely. So tell me a little bit more about the app. Give me the why. What's your story?
Okay, yeah. So I've been a entrepreneur for the entirety of my professional career. Started the journey that I'm still on today that's culminated in Upside 15 years ago, roughly, when I was a junior in college. So at this time, I was working on a fixed income trading desk in the financial industry. And what that did was it gave me, as a really young person, an opportunity to see a glimpse into a track in a world that I just didn't want any part of being in. So I got really motivated before I graduated to create a off ramp for myself from sort of the typical 9 to 5 path, the real world, if you will. And being a lifelong sports fan, I started playing fantasy sports when I was like 3 or 4 years old in my dad's fantasy league when they were still doing everything on pen and paper. So pre-internet days. That fantasy sports betting was kind of a natural place for me to look for, in terms of building something of my own. So this was 2009 or so, 2008, 2009. So that's 10 years prior to the legalization of sports betting in the United States. So at that time, sports betting was entirely illegal, but everywhere you looked, people were doing it, right? And it was very clear that there were billions of dollars being wagered in the United States despite no legal market. So got really curious about that industry and started looking at international markets, specifically the UK, where I saw fully legal regulated online sports betting. And I formed a thesis that became the sort of guiding light for my professional career for the next decade, which was I believed what I was seeing over in Europe would one day, I didn't know exactly when, but one day it would come to the United States. And when it did, anybody that prepared in advance of the opening of the US market would become rich and powerful beyond their wildest dreams, right? I imagine like a future gold rush that I would participate in. And that was, at 22 years old, was one of the few things that I cared about, like probably the only thing. And so I had a vision of becoming rich and using that to cover up all the insecurities that I had at the time. And so I set off building. And so for the first like 3 years or so of my career, I was just getting the basics underneath me. I didn't, know anything about entrepreneurship or technology. So by the time I found my stride, I realized that I had a knack for product innovation in this sports gaming category. Ended up creating a couple of really unique patented products that realized commercial traction in sports gaming. Worked with some of the biggest media companies, biggest sponsor brands, biggest professional athletes in the United States over this 10-year period. So my entire professional career had been in sports betting and fantasy sports. Equally as relevant and way more relevant to my why, which is how you teed this up, was my personal journey that ran alongside that. So a first-time tech entrepreneur, especially one as young as I was, is going to get dinged up no matter what. There's no way you're not. But in hindsight, what I recognize is that, unbeknownst to me, the naivete was a big part of even getting started. So it was a very valuable thing that I had at the time. If I knew what I was facing, I probably never would have taken the first step. But unbeknownst to me, I was kind of taking on the Mount Everest of attempts when it comes to entrepreneurship, in that I was attempting to build an organization for an industry that no one ever knew would even exist, right? It ended up being a decade away from the time I started till it was legalized. So the things that come along with that, and the way that you need to convince people to see the forest through the trees, if you will, was the ultimate sort of journey. And I was entirely ill-equipped, right? I already mentioned I was an insecure kid in general, did not have the mindset or the toolkit that was needed to navigate the level of adversity, uncertainty that I was going to face on this path, especially as I started raising more and more money from people that I cared about. Ended up raising millions of dollars, a lot of that from either friends, family, or, friends of friends, right? And I just didn't have a healthy relationship with that, right? Like to me, I was either the guy that got you a return or the guy that failed on you, right? So I took it super, super personal. And over time, as more and more adversity came and, just the natural course of creating something like this, there's tons of failure, right? And failure, which again, didn't have, now I know failure is just a part of the learning and evolution process. Then, I took it so personally. So all of this ultimately led to me using alcohol as a coping mechanism to get through. And the higher the stakes got raised, the more I leaned into that. So at the end of this first decade chapter of my professional life, I fell into really severe addiction that very nearly took my life at the beginning of 2020. But I'm grateful to say that today I know that that was the single most valuable experience that I've ever had. Right. Going up against the edges of life have a way, there's so much wisdom that comes from it if you make it out the other side. And I did, fortunately. And through recovery, I rebuilt my personal foundation. And the experience that I had just reshaped the way that I look at the entire world, right? The way that I look at why I'm here. So rather than, continuing to try to figure out how do I, accumulate personal wealth, I started to ask myself, how do I use my unique experience and my expertise to help others that are suffering from mental health and addiction? And the divine irony that I landed on as I asked myself that question was, well, the thing that I'm best at, sports betting innovation, is actually on a fast track to create the next epidemic of addiction in this country. That's something that the general public is now becoming more aware of how big of a problem the rapid expansion of online sports betting and the fact that now basically, every 18-year-old kid has a casino in their pocket that they're able to access, and they're marketed to using all the best technology 24 hours a day, and there are no safety belts. People are starting to realize how big of a problem that is. But 4 years ago, when we started Upside, only the insider, vantage point could have predicted what we're seeing. And because I had all of that experience, I was able to see where this was going. And so I brought together a team of experts across gaming, addiction, and behavioral health to come together with the intention of creating the solution to course correct for what we ultimately knew would be, the next epidemic here. And so, my why is to provide a conscious alternative for sports betting to end the harm that it's causing, and then to use it as a platform to reach and empower young people with the tools that they need to live conscious, healthy, purpose-driven lives.
Absolutely. So you kind of touched on it, and thank you for sharing your story and, how you got to where you are today. But so tell me how the app actually does empower. What are some of the tools that it gives to people either that are going through mental health struggles or maybe having some sort of an addiction to betting? What does it actually do?
Yeah, so it's sort of a twofold approach, right? So the first is that we needed to create an alternative to what exists, right? Because what exists is not going away, right? So we started this by saying, okay, there needs to be a solution that comes from within that provides young men with a healthier way to do. And this was not something that it took us. At first, we thought we had to build a safer betting platform where we had guardrails required budgeting and things of that nature. But through the process of creation, which always happens with your hands in the dirt, as you're and takes time, we ended up creating something really, really beautiful where we've recreated the experience of sports betting within a community membership. So how it works is that our members pay a monthly subscription fee to become a member of our community, where they are invited into the organization as owners, and they are able to participate alongside their peers and other like-minded folks in helping to actually shape the way the platform is built and the way that the company is built, while also receiving actual ownership in the organization. So for every dollar that they spend on membership fees, they receive actual equity ownership in the company. And then within that membership experience, they are provided access to a risk-free sports prediction platform where they're able to make picks the same, very similar, almost identical to the way that they make picks on sports books or on fantasy sports platforms, except for they're not putting any money at risk on those picks. So what we do is we recycle or reinvest a portion of the total membership fees that we collect to create prizes to enable payouts that are, again, very similar to what people experience on a sports book. But rather than having unlimited risk and exposure, right, our members are only paying a fixed monthly fee, and that's not variable, right? So that's the way that the platform works. So then from there, right, like, so now they're engaging in this different way of doing things, right? That is far more safe. But we have invited them in to the company now to be owners. And the thing about this demographic that we're serving, young men, right? Like, you asked me, how do you get them things to help them with their mental health, right? If you're talking to a 22-year-old kid, you can't go directly to him with like, you need things to help with your mental health. It doesn't work like that, right? Like, you have to meet them not
Where
just
they
where
are.
they are,
Yeah.
you need to meet them where they want to be,
Yeah.
right?
Hmm.
So what we do is we're using this industry that is super culturally relevant to them. We're allowing them to be part owners of their very own sports gaming company. In doing this, they become business partners with, we'll have professional athletes involved in this organization. So it's a really, really unique experience that speaks directly to their interests. And then we use the relationship that we have with them through this platform to then make tools available to them, such as virtual workout plans, such as meditation groups, right? And this is all sort of packaged within something that's super interesting to them and culturally relevant, such that we're able to actually drive adoption of the tools that we want them to use, right? And at the end of the day, what they're doing is that, for our earliest members, it's $100 a month, right? What they're actually paying for is they're paying for the community, they're paying for investment value, right? Every dollar they spend becomes an investment. And then they're paying for a suite of wellness products that they're getting that ultimately we're looking to, build the value of that to be something equivalent to like your average gym membership, right? So the dollars are going to wellness, to investment, into community, and then we're giving them gaming for free with it.
Absolutely. No, I think that makes complete sense. And it's a great model. And it's a great way to, what I feel like you said already is, well, sports betting is not going anywhere. So how can we actually make it more empowering? How can we make it a little bit better? Kind of like when we talk about AI and we talk about, well, like there are ways that people are really, really relying on ChatGPT to be their therapist or whatnot, or
Right.
like be their companion, right?
Right.
And
Right.
it's just, well, how are we using it
Right.
consciously? How are we
100%.
intentionally using it? So it sounds to me like you're kind of using that with upside and, from your learning, from your experience and your struggles, it's really come to be kind of what it is today. And I think that's it's a great way to use your experience and your story to create something better for a future generation. So
Yeah,
when
well
you think,
said. Thank you.
yeah, yeah. And so when you think about the actual, I mean, trends that you're seeing and maybe some other applications that are out there that just are, I'm not going to name names, but you'll probably know what they are, but like you can bet on everything essentially.
Yeah.
So, what are you doing to stand out? What's been actually working really well for Upside, and what's been a little bit more challenging?
We don't even view ourselves in the as competing or in the category of these the apps that you're referencing. But
Sure.
I'll tell you what's been challenging is, we started out again 4 years ago, and everything comes from, we've used the word consciousness here a couple of times. I think your audience is a different audience, right? Everything starts with an intention, right? And so these other sports betting apps, their intention, and most of the just capitalism in general, right? Like this legacy system that's just actually, being demonstrated to be outdated is causing at the root of so many of our social issues, which is that we are now creating companies and have been for a long time with the purpose of turning $1 into $2 or more, right? It's all the companies, the rules, the legality of these companies are set up to make money, and with the basis of decision making being maximizing shareholder value above all else. These other gambling apps have set up with the intention to make as much money as they can. And then their rules of how they make decisions at the very core are, and legally have to be, we make decisions for the best interest of maximizing shareholder value, right? So it's like Facebook, Facebook and the social dilemma, right? If you go all the way to the core of the problem is the whole organization is oriented around the idea of maximizing shareholder value, and the consumer is the product, right? Because they have an ad-based monetization model, right? So at the end of the day, they're selling you to the advertisers. And if, there's certain things like rage and things like that cause you to be more engaged, if that is the thing that's going to drive shareholder value, they're never going to be able to move to make it different, right? Until they get all the way to the core. So at Upside, we started Upside first from the intention of being the solution to the sports betting crisis that we knew was coming, and ultimately, even more broadly speaking, to use sports betting and convert sports betting into a force for good, right? So that was the intention from which we started. We understood that by doing that, shareholder value will be a natural byproduct, but that's not why we're doing this, right? And then we set up the entire organization from there with that intention in mind. So we're a public benefit corporation. We've set up legally so that we prioritize stakeholder well-being above all else, as opposed to shareholder value, right? But everything that our company does, we're never out of line with the initial intention. We're not here for the purposes of making money. We know we will, because that's the natural byproduct of delivering value. Like I know I'm going down a couple different roads here in this answer, but for me, it's kind of perplexing how hard it is for, sort of a legacy, capitalists to understand that actually the best way to drive shareholder value is to serve humanity. There is no better way to drive value. But so in that journey, the hardest part has been, we said, we're going to convert sports betting into a force for good. And we are going to prioritize stakeholder well-being. So we need to go get a totally different type of capital, right? And we're basically bringing two worlds together that, 4 years ago, people could not see how they could possibly exist together. Sports betting is inherently a bad thing, right? You want to inherently make it a good thing. So bringing those two things together and going through the process of aligning with the right capital partners, and then building enough and creating the solution far enough so that I can say to somebody like you exactly what it is that we're doing, and it's crystal clear. how this is, built in a better, sustainable, safer way, right? So it was a long journey from that initial intention and idea to actually creating something that other people could see and understand that delivered on that initial intention. And then the last thing is that we were the only ones that really understood this problem 4 years ago, right? It wasn't until the last 6 months that the general public has become aware of what's actually going on here. So we'd spent a lot of time on this journey trying to educate people, whereas today, we get on most calls and people are telling us, and more people, unfortunately, are being affected. So, so I hope I answered your question there. I know I went off a couple different directions.
Yeah, but no, it's all very interesting and helpful to know exactly where you're coming from and the intentionality behind why you're doing it, what's important about it. And in this day and age, we need more intentionality behind the apps that are being created. I mean, it's becoming easier and easier to just put an app out there and see what happens, right? But it really just does come down to the intention. So, where do you see this going? Not saying a 5-year plan, but next 6, 12 months from now.
Well, it's probably more interesting to talk about the 5, 10 year plan, but
Sure.
I mean 6 months from now. So we have been building the solution with our community for the past couple years and have been in sort of a private beta. And so we'll be launching our platform to the public. The objective is to do so by this coming football season. And in the interim and over the course of that period of time, we're doing a substantial philanthropic donor capital raise to support, this undertaking. So closing that out, launching the platform, then just continuing to walk the path.
Amazing. Well, Tom, thanks so much for being here. Can people download the app just from their app store? Where can people find you?
They we're still in beta, as I mentioned, so no app on the app store. You can see a little bit about us at upsideapp.com. Outside of that, I don't got don't got much else to share.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much, Tom, for joining us here on The Ripple Effect with Ray. Really looking forward to what our listeners have to say about today's episode.
Fantastic. Thank you for having me, Rachel.